Here we go. Awesome. So in our next segment, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this whole concept of what is a millennial. Who are they? All those pieces. And I think as we begin this, one thing that I just want to toss out there that I think is really important is that a lot of this talk especially is going to be some generalizations. We're going to dive deep into the characteristic of various characteristics about who millennials are, what makes them tick, all those different pieces. But just to recognize that you probably know some millennials that don't exactly fit this mold. You know what I'm saying? So, but just recognize that a lot of the material from this talk in particular comes from different books, different blogs that have been put out, just general trends that people have been seeing from a variety of sources as we kind of dive into it. But first, I want to show you just a quick movie, just a short little clip, not a 2-hour movie. A short little quick clip. This is from Good Morning America, right? I always forget. Yeah, Good Morning America. I got some thumbs up. Good. But from 1993, just a short little Today Show. There we go. Thank you. Today Show. It's very millennial, right? Today Show from 1993. They are discussing the internet in 1993. Go for it.
Back now at 56 past, I wasn't prepared to translate that as I was doing that little tease.
Oh, that's
that little mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At.
See, that's what I said.
Mm-hmm.
Katie said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
But I'd never heard
or
it.
Around
I'd never heard it said. I'd always seen the mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I heard be around big fight up in the lunchroom the other week.
There it is. Violence at NBC. GE.com. I mean.
Well, Allison should know.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is that
massive computer network.
The one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of started from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's like a computer billboard.
It's not in it. It's a computer billboard, but it's nationwide, and it's several universities and everything all joined together.
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
It came in really handy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating out to tell family and loved ones they were okay because all the phone lines were down.
I was telling Katie, and I've been
talking. But you don't need a phone line to operate internet?
No.
Can we give them a huge round of applause? The fact that we can make fun of them at this day and age. How many of you had one of the original Mac computers? High and proud, it's okay. I mean, I remember, so I'm a more of an early stage millennial. I can remember using the large floppy disks for my computer class in like 6th grade, you know, sticking them in the big thing. Yeah, all of that. Clearly, times have changed. These are not our computers anymore. Maybe you still have one around. Yeah, we'll see. Over here, you can see this is 2005, 2013. On the left side, you can see some religious habits, all of that. Anybody know what that is in 2005 on the left side? Feel free to shout it out. Anybody? John Paul, it's right when he passed away. So yeah, very close, very close. So 2005, right when he passed away, people flooding the streets of the Vatican. How about 2013? Yeah, Francis's election, right? And so look at the difference. You can see the sea of cell phones and iPads. If you look closely on the 2005 one, you will see a lonely flip phone in the bottom right corner. Anybody have a flip phone still? I know a few people. Awesome. I kind of want one. That's a internal thing. Anyway, we can see that things are drastically different, right? That there has been. I mean, we have essentially witnessed this major change in how we communicate in human history, right? One thing that I will constantly, be talking about in this talk, but we'll mention it throughout the day, is that my language as a millennial is images. Because of the introduction of the internet, and growing up in that, like, we are so image saturated, whether it be through social media, through anything that's online, anything that has a visual kind of image, that speaks my language before words, right? And just something is so simple like that, where perhaps for a lot of older generations, it was more words and then images kind of came later. For us, it's in many ways very switched, right? Or it's the opposite. And I think particularly this kind of like, this season of where we're at in human history, this fundamental change has had some dramatic effects, some dramatic influences on our young people in a particular way. Like I said, so I was born in 1985, so I'm an early stage millennial. I didn't have my first phone until I was a freshman in college, which was probably a little bit later. But I'm still a young guy. I'm only 33, 34 next week, right? Yeah. But to think about it, like your typical like fifth grader has a smartphone, right, and has this this computer that's completely like at their fingertips, right? And so it's just recognizing, I think, on the front end that times are different and times have changed, but in the midst of that, we have this generation of millennials, these bright, smart, beautiful kids, you know, in a very real way that have grown up in this kind of education, in this formation, in the midst of it, right? Where I think for me, I don't know life in many ways without the internet. I can remember it at different points, certainly, but anybody that's younger than me, I think in many ways, doesn't know life underneath, you know, without the internet, you know, just something so simple like that. And just to recognize those pieces as we dive into today. This guy working. There we go. So if you look here, this is one of the first articles that I saw from like a kind of more national or global level about the millennial generation. The meme generation is what it says up there from Time magazine. If you can see the little tagline at the bottom, millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists who still live with their parents. The second article is why they'll save us all. Right? And I want to point this out because I think oftentimes when you read either blogs or you hear about millennials, or maybe you work with millennials, maybe your kids are millennials, whatever it might be, I think oftentimes we can see the negative characteristics, right, and kind of grab a hold of that, of, okay, the lazy, narcissistic, you know, still live with their parents kind of idea, but at the same time recognize that there's a ton of talent and drive and passion behind this generation. So my hope for us today in many ways, and certainly within this talk, is, okay, let's take a look at this generation, right, a little bit from like the zoo kind of standpoint, right? Let's take a look at this generation and look, okay, what are the things that they're going to struggle with, but what are the things that if we empower them in the right way, they are just going to blow the doors open, specifically within the church, right? And I think that's just a reality. So no matter what your experiences are kind of coming into this, I just invite you to kind of have a hands open, open just to receive, you know, maybe you've even been hurt by different millennials in your life, whatever it might be, to just have hands open to just receive, okay, that this is this generation, this is how, for, you know, for better or for worse, our society, our culture has formed our young people, right? When we see these general trends as an entire generation, that's not necessarily their fault. It's how we've actually formed them in our society, in our culture. You know, the classic kind of idea with millennials is, oh, they've received participation trophies, right? I played soccer 1 year my entire life. It was when I was 5 years old. I still have an AYSO soccer trophy, participation trophy. Like, I don't know how to kick a ball. Like, I literally, like, I can't even play, like, pick-up soccer games, like, these days, right? But I have a trophy that says that I did it, right? You know, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of deal, but when you think of this idea of, like, the participation trophy, yes, I received that, but somebody also gave it to me, right? I was in a system that gave me that, right? And so all of a sudden there's like kind of this entitled feel, which we'll get into in a little bit. But just to recognize that, you know, because I think that's just a really important piece as we dive in today. Time magazine, awesome. So as we take this like view into millennials, we'll see obviously some technology pieces, some strengths, certainly some weaknesses. But in the midst of it, again, you might look at it and be like, well, my kid who's a millennial isn't that way. Great. There's some things here that I really see in my own life, and I would say the other presenters would say the same thing. But there's also some things it's like, that's not me. And that's okay. We're kind of looking at general trends as we dive in. Okay, so who are millennials, right? So born 1984 to 2001, this is a very rough sketch. I've seen so many different kind of gauges here. Some people have said, like, 1980, 81 to about 1996, 97. But we're looking at roughly people that have been born in the 80s and 90s, essentially, right? And again, kind of that introduction of the internet, specifically within the 90s, kind of started this. The selfie generation, focused obviously with the phone taking pictures, all of that. The Peter Pan generation, when you think of Peter Pan, what does he not want to do is grow up, right? And so that can in a lot of ways be a characteristic of our generation. And then even as Bishop mentioned at the very beginning, right, Generation Y, the generation after Generation X, and now that we're seeing our young people through high school and college, or Generation Z. But that's really who we're kind of looking at today. So again, kind of rough, it depends who you're talking to, or the books or different sources, but roughly in the 80s and 90s is who we're looking at. Okay, so with that, what are some major characteristics? Again, we're going to kind of run through these, but if you've got a pen, this is a good one to start writing down. Okay. So, entitled, right? And this is the classical one. If you read anything or have done any sort of research about millennials, this is a number one that everybody's seeing. It's even in that Time magazine article, is this idea of entitlement, right? That I have a right to what I want, right? I can get what I want when I want it, and I have a right to it, right? And so we can see this in kind of a heartbreaking situation where a lot of people from my generation, I'm thinking of classmates of mine in high school, dive into college, spend a ton of money, come out, and they can't find a job, right? But I feel entitled to have the job, right? I get into a job, and then 18 months later, I'm not where I want to be, and so what do? Is I leave. I remember talking to a Legatus event, so it's a bunch of like Catholic business owners. I said, how many of you have had millennials leave within 18 months of their employment? And all their hands, I mean, there was one guy that put two hands up, kind of thing, because it's a common thing, right? And so that's what we're looking at. In the midst of that, they can really encounter a very harsh reality, my generation. In the midst of this, of like kind of getting or feeling as though we can get whatever we want. The world doesn't work that way. We know this, right? The church doesn't work that way. Faith and spirituality don't work that way. And so coming in and encountering this world, especially right out of college, where we feel entitled oftentimes, we encounter a very harsh reality in the midst of it. And we'll tie into a few more things, certainly, but this is kind of a number one, certainly more of a negative characteristic. Next one is an extended adolescence. I know within my work with young adults in particular, there are countless young adults that I will meet on a regular basis that are 27, 28, all throughout their early 30s, that still act as though they're 22 and still in college, right? That there really is that kind of Peter Pan generation sense oftentimes, is this, I don't want to grow up. And so this means a number of different things, even if they have something that's a well-paying job, or have some of their stuff together in one end, maybe emotionally, they're not fully there. They still have an adolescent kind of emotional response, whatever it might be. There are these situations where my generation has this extended adolescence. If you've ever heard the term adulting before, that's like a common word that's used in a lot of jargon and lingo and whatnot. Adulting is the whole idea of taking on responsibility. I remember the first time that I went to the grocery store and bought my own groceries. It was my first job out of college, right? Because I lived in the dorms my whole time, and that was like a very intimidating thing to just go out there and buy groceries. Now it's not a big deal, but just like there's a little bit of a, because of that extended adolescence, there's kind of this like, okay, adult responsibilities are something new, and I don't know exactly how to manage it, right? For a number of different reasons. But we're seeing this within my generation, certainly. The next one is idealistic. I want to do something big. I think this is something that is really beautiful, especially within the church, because as Pete was saying before, we have amazing answers to this generation. But at the end of the day, I think, we're talking about millennials. We've got like 550 people gathered today because the church is asking this question. Recognize that the question we're asking about how to engage millennials is not just a church thing, it's a whole world thing. Businesses are looking at it. I mean, everybody is trying to really answer this question of how do we really empower and equip millennials to really, again, kind of blow the doors open and do something great with their lives. And I think this is a really big piece of it and a great piece of how we can engage our young people in the church. Millennials are idealistic. We want to do something big. We want to do something greater. I think, and again, this is a generalization, but for a lot of us, kind of going through our lives, we saw our parents in many ways just like get a paycheck, right, and do a job that they may or may not have liked or may not have enjoyed. But for a lot of us, it's like, no, I want to do I want a job that will make an impact, right? Kind of the piece with the entitled piece is I want to make an impact within like 9 months, right? And that may or may not be the case, and that's where that harsh reality oftentimes kind of sets in, is I want to do something big, want to do something great. I think the difficult part about that is oftentimes we lack like the arduous process in the middle of it, right? We can oftentimes kind of shrink back when we see that it's actually a really difficult, long process to do something great, but there is certainly this idealistic standpoint, and so with that can certainly avoid responsibility or even effort. This is a huge one, right? And honestly, somebody, I think Annie mentioned this at the beginning, this very instant gratification kind of culture that we live in, pulling out phones all the time, I'll be honest with you, I don't think this is just a millennial problem, this is just a human person problem in our day and age, is we are immediately gratified as Americans especially, right? There is an Amazon like warehouse, probably 20 minutes from my house in Milwaukee, just south of it. It is scary fast how much or how quickly they can get me something that I order on Amazon. I mean, it's literally within 24 hours. That's scary fast, right? And so with that, what our young people are being appropriated into is this immediate gratification sort of experience. And so if I want something, I'm going to get it. And not only am I going to get it, but I'm going to get it immediately, right away, right? And so with this, I think a big piece of it, and it goes back to, it's the most overquoted quote in the history of quoted quotes, is our hearts are restless until they rest in you, right? St. Augustine's like famous quote. And the reality is that whatever that is, that instant gratification, we know that it's not going to satisfy. We know as a church that that's not actually going to be the answer. But I think a lot of people in my generation, it's like, well, if I can get the next thing, that's actually going to be fulfilling, that's actually going to fill the infinite longing that's within my heart. Even thinking of the church, what is the center of our history? It's the Paschal mystery. It's Jesus Christ, right? For a lot of my generation, the center of our history is the next iPhone that's coming out, right? It's the next big thing sort of idea, stealing it from Samsung, right? Is I get what I want and I get it immediately. And you can look at that and maybe see a little bit of that in yourself, certainly, because, again, we're a product of this culture in a lot of ways. But especially when it comes to millennials, this is all we know. You know what I mean? So just to really understand that this massive change that's happened in history, this is what we know, right? And so then when, especially I think within the church, when we introduce things like the Mass, right? Sitting down for personal prayer, the sacramental life, these different pieces that oftentimes are very slow and are not very immediate, that's where it can be a little bit jarring for my generation oftentimes. Next is vocal. I think this is a huge one, especially kind of getting into the connectedness that millennials desire, is we want to have a voice. We want to have a voice in whatever it is that in many ways we feel like we have a right to. We have a desire to be listened to, a desire to be empathized with, and I think this is a really, really important topic and thing to consider, especially as church leaders, is we want to have a voice in whatever it is that we're a part of. Again, we're idealistic, want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, and we would love to have a participation in that, right? We want to have a voice in that, and so in many ways can be very vocal, so that desire to be listened to. Next one is that low self-esteem, which really kind of comes in to play with a lot of the other things I was talking about, is there's also the reality of I don't know how, right? I have, and I'm, again, speaking in that generalization, but feeling entitled to what I want and instantly gratified in what I want, but when that process becomes difficult, when that task becomes arduous, all of a sudden I recognize my poverty, right? And that's a really scary thing. One trend that we're seeing oftentimes in millennials is this higher rate in anxiety. We're seeing it in Generation Z as well. But anxiety issues are going through the roof, and I think a lot of it has to do with this low self-esteem of not having the tools in the toolbox to take care of either whatever task I've been given or the emotional response to which my generation responds with. And so this anxious, kind of overwhelmed sort of situation starts to really to skyrocket in a lot of ways. Next, hey, there we go. Experience is I want more than just the product. I want a whole experience. This is going to sound super funny. I was actually talking to one of the priests about it this morning. So when it came to the relationship with coffee, I'm definitely the dog like running. I love coffee, and especially in Milwaukee, we're really big in like new coffee roasters and all of that kind of stuff. Is when I go into a coffee shop, I'm not just going there to get what's in the cup. I want the whole experience, right? It's got to be more than just the actual thing. It is that, certainly, but I want something that's good coffee, and I want the whole experience as a whole, right? And so I think in many ways, our generation is looking for an experience, right, in everything it is that we do. Whatever, whether it's what we do on a Saturday night or on a Sunday morning, certainly within our job, everything, that there's some sort of attention to environment, to the experience, to everything that kind of fills the five senses in many ways. And so wanting more than just the product that we're coming there for. There we go. Connected, right? And so this is an interesting one because there's certainly this kind of like tension between more connected than ever via social media and different opportunities with the internet. We have the opportunity to be more connected than ever, yet at the same time, what statistics and trends are showing us is that oftentimes millennials can lack meaningful relationships, right? It's easy to be connected to thousands and thousands of people, right? Via Twitter, via Facebook, via Instagram, whatever it might be, yet at the same time can really lack that opportunity and really the skills and knowledge of being able to have a face-to-face, real-life, human person, eye-to-eye conversation. I've experienced this so much in my work with young adults, especially people that are coming right out of college. They're an accountant. They move downtown, live by themselves, all those pieces. It's so hard to make friends. It's easy to tweet a bunch of things. It's easy to put things out there, but it's so difficult oftentimes to actually make friends. Even within our kind of societal structures, it's not easy to fit into different places. And so every millennial is looking for a place to belong, a place to have community. And I think in many ways, there's this kind of like, oh, they're more connected than ever, where the reality is that I think we're actually more disconnected than ever, right? And maybe you see that in yourself, because I think, again, we're all the product of this culture, but I think especially in the way that our society has formed our young people, this is a big piece, is there's this desire to be known and to know others, but oftentimes can lack the meaningful relationships in it. There we go. Next one is collaborative, and I think this is big, especially on your teams. If you work with millennials more immediately or just in your broader office, whatever it might be, is there is a desire to work together. Again, that sense of like having a voice in things, right? Whatever it might be that I'm excited about. There's a real desire to want to work with others, and I think this has a lot to do with, again, introduction to the internet, social media, those technological pieces, is that this is what we're used to. It's not even just something that, like, oh, this would be a nice thing to have happen. It's like, no, this is what we're used to. This is how we've grown up. This is the education system even that we've been kind of filtered through, is I want to work with others, and I want to have a collaborative relationship. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine. It was interesting. We were going through or talking about Stephen Covey's like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? And the whole premise of it is you go from dependent to independent to interdependent. It was interesting because he, who's more of an early stage millennial, was saying, you know, this desire to go from dependence to independence to interdependence. He was like, I actually know a lot about interdependence because of this very collaborative kind of nature that I've worked in, and collaborative like culture that I've grown up in. It's the independence piece that I have no idea what to do. Right? That's actually the thing, that adulting, that taking on responsibility is the thing that I feel really inadequate for. And so just to kind of highlight that, I think one of the biggest things that we can do for my generation is to give them real human experiences. It's that human formation, right? Yes, spiritual, yes, intellectual, yes, pastoral, those different pieces within our formation in the church. But that human formation is so incredibly important because that's oftentimes what is lacking. I have a buddy of mine that I've done ministry with, and he's was talking about how difficult our job is in the church, because obviously we're trying to invite these young people into a relationship with a God they can't see, and for a lot of them, they don't even really know how to have a long-lasting relationship, even just with another human being. For a number of different reasons and different impacts, that we need to have that incarnational ministry, that relational ministry first and foremost, to be able to introduce them to the person of Jesus Christ. Next one is authenticity, is I want the real thing. I hear my wife in this so much. You have no idea. Is like she wants something that's real, right? There's a reality where we've experienced a significant amount of fake growing up. We've certainly experienced a lack of integrity in leaders and politicians, even within the church, and those pieces. We want authenticity most of all. I remember just a couple of weeks ago, I heard about a bishop that's doing just little 2-minute blurbs on social media. It's just him, cup of coffee, sitting at his desk, kind of mentioning like a few things, right, about his life. And because it's daily, it has that authentic nature to it, and he's just a very relatable person, but it's also that accessibility, right? And just to recognize that whatever your role might be within the church, are you being authentic, as Pete was talking about before, that authenticity and having that relationship with Christ that you're introducing people into, but also that accessibility, right? Do they know you, right? Do they know the depth of love? Do they know your story, right? And in some ways that actually requires a lot of vulnerability as us as leaders, but recognize that that's what this generation is craving for, right? Is that authenticity, that accessibility that oftentimes is lacking. Okay. In the midst of this, I know that this was a fire hose, lots of different things. Maybe some of these things you've heard before, some of it was new, some of it you might disagree with, that's great, Some things that you're like, oh, I see this in my kids, but I don't see this, maybe in one kid, but not the other one. Whatever the situation might be, I want to dive a little bit deeper into the roots here. And essentially look at 3 major questions that our team has really discerned. These are kind of the 3 major questions that every millennial is asking, right? Where do I fit, right? Obviously, a very existential, human question, right, is where do I fit? Where is it that I can belong? And as Pete was saying, the church, we have this great answer to it, but this is really the question at the heart of every millennial. I think this one in particular. In my work in young adult ministry, literally everything that we do, we begin with some opportunity as people come through the door to help them belong. Right? Before we do anything else, before we preach, before we do a Bible study, before whatever it is that they're actually coming to, that on the front end, everything is geared by this sense of belonging first and foremost, right? So where do I fit? That's a real question. So in your work, again, whether you're an administrative assistant, whether you're in charge of baptismal prep, marriage prep, a youth minister, a pastor, whatever it might be, whenever you're engaging with a millennial, to actually lead with that before anything else that you do, right, in the sense of belonging. The next one is, who am I, right? Duh, this is a human question, right, first and foremost. Each one of us asks this question, but this is really on the heart of the millennial generation, I think, because in a lot of ways, because of our social media influence and the ways that we've experienced that, this idea of identity is such a big piece of it, right? I have my online identity and the ways that filter out life, right? The ways that I show everybody how great life is when inside it actually might be a little dark, right? Or I might be experiencing this anxiety, this overwhelm. So in a lot of ways, millennials can have this tendency to live a very filtered life, right? But there's deep down, there really is this kind of core question of who am I in my identity? And last one, so where do I fit? Who am I? This last one is, what is my purpose, right? what is the point of all of this? And this really hits at what Pete was talking before. What's that why? What is the point? I mean, certainly within the church, but more from like an existential, like, what is the point of life, right? What is the meaning of all these things? Like that this is really at the heart of my generation. And again, the beauty is that the church has a great answer. We just have to figure out the right methods, the right engagement, the right ways to really engage these very deep level questions of our generation. So looking here, this is from Dr. Peter Kreeft, but it's a little take on our hearts are restless until they rest in you. But I love this. We have a Grand Canyon-sized hole in our hearts that we try to fill with marbles, right? Isn't this the truth? Our little idols, right? Our little sins. But to recognize that this Grand Canyon-sized hole in our hearts is so apparent in my generation, right? And so, again, wherever you're at, whatever it is that you do, the millennials that you know, whoever you wrote on your program, whatever that might be, to recognize, like, don't give up on us. Like, I just, like, beg of you, you know, like, whatever it is that your role is, don't give up on us. Yeah, there might be these difficult encounters, these, like, trying situations. Maybe millennials aren't even coming to your church, whatever it might be, but don't give up on it because this generation really has a lot to offer the world, right? Even going back to that Time magazine, like, there's something amazing about my generation, and I would just ask that you don't give up on us, but really seek to engage us, right? Really seek to engage us, to be able to draw us closer to the heart of Christ so that we too might be able to become these close companions with Jesus that joyfully invite people to follow him, right, most of all.